بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نبدأ بإذن الله. تسمعوني؟ نعم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيدات والسادة الحضور، نرحب بكم في مركز دراسات النزاع والعمل الإنساني في ندوتنا اليوم تحت عنوان قطاع غزة بعد 15 عاما من الحصار و5 حروب، أصوات من الداخل. نرحب بالسادة المشاركين معنا اليوم من داخل قطاع غزة: الدكتور مازن العجلة، أستاذ وباحث في الاقتصاد، والدكتور ياسر أبو جامع، مدير برنامج غزة للصحة النفسية، والأستاذة ريم فرينة، مدير جمعية عائشة لحماية المرأة والطفل بغزة، والمهندس صلاح عبد اللطيف طه، الرئيس التنفيذي لشركة راي للاستشارات. أهلا وسهلا بكم جميعا. للتذكير للحضور، تبث هذه المحاضرة عبر منصات التواصل الاجتماعي لمركز دراسات النزاع والعمل الإنساني على كل من منصات الفيسبوك وتويتر واليوتيوب، كما تتوفر خاصية الترجمة للغة الإنجليزية عن طريق اختيار خاصية اللغة الإنجليزية عند أيقونة اللغات في برنامج زوم. ويمكن للسادة الحضور طرح أسئلتهم عبر خاصية الأسئلة والأجوبة في التطبيق، كما يمكن للسادة المشاهدين ترك الأسئلة والتعليقات عبر المنصات المختلفة، وسيقوم زملائي في المركز بتجميعها ومشاركتها مع المتحدثين لاحقا. قبل أن نبدأ في موضوع الندوة، أحب الإشارة إلى أن الندوة ستركز على قطاع غزة والحصار والعدوان الإسرائيلي المستمر المتواصل في 20 سنة الماضية، ليس فقط 15 سنة الماضية. غزة تلك المنطقة الصغيرة المعزولة تقع على مساحة 365 كيلومتر مربعا بتعداد سكان يفوق 2 مليون نسمة. كان القطاع تحت الاحتلال العسكري الإسرائيلي المباشر من العام 1967، وكانت إسرائيل قد قامت بنوع من الانسحاب أو إعادة الانتشار في العام 2005. ومن يونيو 2007 فرض على قطاع غزة حصارا مع إغلاق الحدود الجوية والبرية والبحرية، فيما يعرف بأنه إنشاء أول سجن مفتوح واسع نطاق في العالم. بموجب هذا الحصار قيد الكيان الإسرائيلي حرية الحركة والتنقل للمواطنين، وفرض قيودا صارمة على السفر بين قطاع غزة والضفة الغربية والسفر من القطاع إلى العالم الخارجي
in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and allowed minimum access into and out of Gaza except in very severe and restricted conditions. Over the last 15 years, the Gaza Strip has faced continuous military operations, 5 main ones. The latest was this month, which continued 3 days. This blockade with the continuous military occupations operations led to the deterioration of the Gazan economy, which led many international organizations to forecast that life may not be sustainable with the end of 2020. And this situation has impacted all aspects of life. Also, the lack of basic infrastructure, electricity, health services, sewage systems, etc., has led to dire consequences. Also, unemployment is as high as over 55%, and unemployment is around 60% or more. Now, in this seminar, we will try to avoid talking about the complexities of politics and talk about reconciliation and the relations between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, and other factions, the relations with Israel. All of this is covered extensively in news programs and other events. We will try to focus on the destruction in the last 15 years and the 5 wars. Our panelists will try to explain the impact of repeated Israeli aggression and the impact on the life of people in Gaza Strip, and as far as the economy is concerned, the psychological impact, women's condition, and to shed light on all of these things. We will start with our first speaker, Dr. Mazen Ejlah. His intervention will be entitled Reconstruction of Gaza, Continuous Destruction and Shy Reconstruction. Dr. Mazen has a PhD in economics and taught for the last 25 years at different universities in the Gaza Strip and worked as an advisor to many civil society organizations and has many research papers and 5 books, the last entitled The Lost Years of Development in Gaza, and is concerned with the reconstruction and development in Gaza. We welcome Dr. Mazen. We give you 15 minutes. Please, the floor is yours. Can you hear me, Dr. Mazen? Thank you, Dr. Ghassan, and thank you for your introduction, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you to the center and your team. And I would like to welcome my colleagues, the panelists, and all those who are following this event. This theme actually, and by that I mean the blockade, has many aspects to it. In fact, 2 million people have been subjected to all sorts of an undignified way of living, and their rights are violated. I would like to say, first of all, that I'll talk about the reconstruction in its widest context. I'm not talking about the impact and the mitigating the 5 wars imposed on Gaza. Must also include the blockade, which continues now on the Gaza. I'll start by 3 main observations. The first being that it's necessary to base our talk on the fact that Gaza Strip is still under Israeli military and colonial occupation. By that I mean there is a complete system based on the conditions imposed by Israel, which is manifested first in the blockade imposed for the last 15 years, which makes experts classify the population of Gaza as belonging to the fragile and vulnerable people. The second observation is the blockade is a colonial methodology started from the from the beginning of the Palestinian Authority, from the early 1990s, there was partial and sometimes total closure on the crossings. And so therefore the methodology of the blockade and siege has been there, present in and manifesting itself in different shapes and forms, sometimes apparent, sometimes not so apparent and implicit. And after the control of Hamas over the Gaza Strip in 2007, this blockade has been the most expanded, comprehensive, and the longest so far. For example, there is a blockade over the tools of production and the ways and means the people earn their living. Unfortunately, in addition to the repercussions of the blockade, we suffer from two forms of struggle, the external one with the occupation and the internal because of the division and the rift between Hamas and the PA. So therefore, we suffer from the impact of these two aspects of struggles, and the results have been tragic, and the accumulation of the different effects of these two aspects being vulnerable and suffering from these two forms of struggle. After the call of Hamas over Gaza, the blockade has started in a savage way. And one of the indicators shows that the strip used to consume more than 4,000 commodities. After the blockade went down to 68 basic commodities which people need to sustain life. It's bare minimum degree. So therefore, the blockade itself, in order to achieve its purposes from the point of view of Israel, had to be applied in this way, and the closure from land, sea, and air entry points and crossings have been restrictly applied, and the four crossings, there were 5 crossings. Now there is only one crossing, which is Karam Abu Salim, which is a commercial crossing between Gaza and Israel. The rest of the crossing points have been closed, and this is a way to restrict the commercial activity of Gaza Strip with the outside world. Also, when we talk about this, we must remember the buffer zone that Israel has imposed on the northern and other borders, which is between 100 to 500 meters wide, which is forbidden for anybody to enter, and only small types of plantation is allowed, and this means that a large swathe of the agricultural land has been forbidden. If these areas were allowed to be used and utilized, this means that people would have gained something like $60 million worth of agricultural products. Also, so far as the maritime borders are concerned, the area allowed for fishing for the Palestinians was restricted, and apart from restricting the area, also firing on fishermen, which led to many of them being killed, and also the other ways of restricting their ability to earn their living. Also restrictions on the movement of people and commodities. As we mentioned before, this now there's only one commercial crossing is open, and this does not allow people as businessmen or people who want to travel or ill people who seek treatment, and all of these are restrictions on the movement of goods and people. Another restriction, of course, is the security restrictions. Almost half of the sick people were not given permits for them or their family members to leave Gaza. Also, 50% of the time, Karam Abu Salam was closed and other crossings also. These are the kind of restrictions that occupation authorities apply. Also, the so-called dual use list of goods, anything which is suspected of being used for military use, there is a list of about 56 and only 61 types of goods are allowed to enter into Gaza Strip, including construction material, which was only allowed recently. Organizations concerned with this testify that the Israeli authorities allow the goods, essential goods, to enter Gaza according to an equation whereby they calculate the calories needed by people. This is actually very tragic that 2 million people are treated in this undignifying way. When we talk about the mechanisms here, we must not forget the military operations, 5 military operations, which make one wonder, is this a constant methodology applied all the time, that every time the Palestinian people wanted to take a post to take care of their lives, either border crossings or military operations or other means of assault on their lives take place. And there was the latest one about a month ago, and before that, a year ago, did not allow reconstruction to go ahead. The reconstruction of what was destroyed in May 2021 has not taken place. Maybe 60%, not more. We have 4 towers which house 360 housing units, do not even have any pledges or any contracts to be reconstructed, and without even sorting out that problem came the other aggression. And I must remind everyone that more than 1,200 housing units have not been reconstructed since the 2014 aggression. Also, the damage suffered by the business community from 2014 until now have not been compensated. At the level of the human resources, over 5,400 people have been martyred, and many of them are women, and more than 13,000 housing units uh, and destroyed completely, and more than 44,000 partially, and more than 575 factories, more than 2,700 vehicles for business and public
الخسائر الوحيدة
utility
هذه الخسائر بلغت
facilities.
7.6 مليار دولار.
The total losses for all of these combined is around $7.6 billion. In these cases, we are talking about thousands of lives lost, the destruction of housing units which provide shelter for people and their memories, where people were born and raised and lived all their lives. We should look beyond the figures, and you cannot really put a quantitative price or cost on the damage people suffer as a result of the suffering they go through. Although this is being continuously mentioned, some people have been confiscated and rebuilt their houses, but are they psychologically sound after the psychological suffering and the loss of their family members and the loss of their childhood memories? And that, I think all of these aspects we should remember. And in summary, all these losses should be looked at from an accumulative point of view. By that, I mean that even when we talk about reconstruction from a materialistic point of view, 2014 until now, economic damage has not been confiscated in a way, let alone the psychological and other aspects, and the loss of development, which has stopped, well, used to stop every other month as a result of these restrictions, which are not reducing. In fact, they are increasing with the passage of time, with devastating effect on the lives of people and the families who are the population, people who live. The most important loss was in industry and agriculture, which suffered. Their share of the economy went down from 22 to 11 or 10%. These are very important for export, and employing people are under severe restrictions and have become now much weaker and fragile, and also can business people can even think of more investment and expansion. The time when the small factories, small businesses which employ 1 to 4 people can benefit, when the business people themselves expect a war any second, or more closures, or more deterioration in the wages system because of the lower wages which keep going down and down. So there is no expansion, and there is also retraction. And all of this led together to the dissipation of the purchasing power as a result of accumulating debts and the lack of food security and poverty, and also many businessmen have ended up in prison because they couldn't keep up with the payments, and therefore all of this impacted the competitiveness
أعدت الأنكتاد في 2018 في 6
in
شهادات
in 2018, an attempt to estimate the damage resulting from the situation in Gaza led to some estimates saying that as a result of all these crashes, the total losses amount to $16.7 billion. And when we talked about only the material cost of this destruction, we talked about $8 billion. When the UNCTAD says that this estimate, which takes into account other aspects, jumps to $16.7 billion. And the losses as a result of military wars was about $8 billion. So you can imagine after 15 years of accumulated effect, this led to a total loss of $16.7 billion. This is 6 times of the national gross national product and of 1.7% of the total national growth product, domestic product of Pakistan. There are other points. The share of the Gazan economy from the total Palestinian in 2005 compared to 2021 went down by a large quantity, and the same applies to the share per capita. And until now, in 2000, it has never gone back to how it was in 2005. And if OCHA's way of describing this in its database by the number of trucks before the truck was 112,000 trucks. Now it's around 26,000. Imagine the population which went up from 1.5 million to 2 million requires an increase in the economic product. But now the imports are not matching the level of 2007, and this indicates the deterioration in all aspects. Also, even the experts before 2005, the experts used to be measured by 9,500 trucks, and when the blockade was eased a little bit, the level reached 3,500. But in general, all aspects of the gross national product have not gone back to the old levels. Finally, Gaza is now by two things, poverty and violence. When we talk about official measures of poverty, in 2017, like 53% of the World Bank estimates it to be around 60% by and large, and soon a new report will be published. And also the level of unemployment, according to the International Labour Organization, and other estimates put it around 58%. Unemployment is very high amongst university graduates, is over 70, amongst women is 70. 1.3 million people in Gaza need help and support, and the middle class, when the poor classes is over 60%, this means the middle class will be about 20% or so. The rate of divorce is going up rapidly, and this is compared to the previous decade, compared to the West Bank. Also, there is a lot of loss in the infrastructure. My colleague Salah will talk about. I want to conclude by an important observation, and that is the accumulation of problems leads to new problems. You can say we see that this accumulation leads to think that if the general trend of the economy in the 90s continued, then the level of poverty would have remained at the level of 15%. So therefore, the division and the blockade should be responded to by national unity. There is no alternative. This can provide the political background and the ability to face up to all these challenges which really impact people's lives. It's the right path. Until it happens, we have to also think, at least so far as the reconstruction, if nothing else, is it really feasible that from 2015 until now, people who require help more than $10,000 or $15,000 have not been confiscated? The aid should be linked to development. Thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Mazen.
Thank you, Dr. Mazen. Indeed, you have passed the allotted time by 15 minutes. The gentleman is saying 7 minutes. We'll move to Abdul Latif Taha.
على البنية التحتية. مهندس صلاح حاصل على بكالوريوس وماجستير.
Salah Taha holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in infrastructure planning and management from the Islamic University of Gaza. He is currently the CEO of RAI Consultancy. He works now as a consultant for planning management. He worked for the UNDP and Oxfam, as well as he worked with the Islamic Development Bank, the World Bank, and he is a trainer in planning and management of development projects, monitoring and evaluating, and he has several academic and research contributions, most notably a book entitled Marketing and Making a Strategy in Cooperation with Wael Publishing House. He participated with the UNDP in analyzing data and preparing a report on infrastructure damage assessment in Gaza. Please, Engineer Salah, the floor is yours. Peace be upon you, God's blessings and His mercy. Thank you, Dr. Ghassan, for organizing this symposium. And I would like to thank the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies for the organization of this meeting. I hope I'll be brief to talk about the harm inflicted on the infrastructure, especially the latest aggression and the long-term impact thereby since the blockade. I'll be talking about the latest aggression when it comes to statistics, the aggression that took place in August this year. As you've said in the introduction, and Dr. Mazen corroborated that this is not the first aggression. It has been preceded by different aggressions, and indeed the remedy of the problems in Gaza is extremely difficult. The latest aggression, like others, targeted sector Gaza and all the governorates, starting from Gaza, Shamal, Khan Yunis, Rafah in the south, and middle Gaza as well. And the aggression targeted all the territory of the Gaza Strip. As we talk about the infrastructure, we talk about 10 domains. We talk about the housing sector, the buildings, the units, the public building, education, road and networks, the transport. We talk about the wash facilities, municipal machinery, as well as health, the ICT, and the energy, lastly, which represents a persistent problem and an obstacle before all efforts. Here we're talking about electricity. The impact has been accumulative. It started with the blockade in 2007, and then the first aggression in 2008, 2009. A number of facilities and economic units and residential units have been destroyed. And as Dr. Mazen has said, most of the units were not reconstructed. This has affected all facets of life, the economic development, and the other dimensions. The electricity problem is perpetual, and indeed all the sectors have been affected. The development has been halted, and the constructed facilities, or some of them, were not maintained in an optimal fashion. If we give you an outline of the losses during the last aggression that stretched over only 3 days, this is a microsome of other aggressions. 18 residential units were destroyed completely, 68 were partially destroyed, and it affected 450 individuals, and 1,675 were harmed kind of lightly, and 8,500 individuals were impacted. Here we're talking about only 3 days, let alone the 2021 aggression and the 2014 aggression that took place or stretched over 50 days. As far as the health facilities are concerned, we had 81, and most of them were in a state of emergency. 22 of them were managed by the UNRWA, and during the attack, paramedics play a major role, and most of the surgeries are delayed. Most of the transfer of patients will be halted, and all the health care employees play a major role in the emergency response. And as we follow reports, indeed, pharmaceuticals have been depleted at the time. And as far as the wash sector is concerned, we have the Rashid Street that has been greatly affected, interruption of sanitation and interruption of water, the solar as well that is necessary for the generators of electricity. We witnessed a shortage in the solar, and electricity outages were very prominent, in addition to the other issues that relate to waste management. As far as the solid waste management is concerned, this has been affected gravely as the landfills are situated nearer the green line, so it is difficult to get to them, or rather, we are prohibited from getting there, so the trucks would unload the waste in different areas, and this affects the health of the population. This picture on the screen illustrates the damage to one of the streets in Gaza, and this picture took place in the last aggression, or the one before the last aggression in 2021. Indeed, the harm is great. It affects the electricity network, the water network, the sanitation, the communication network, the total destruction of the street and the pipes and the lines thereby. As far as the electricity is concerned, and this is the hot potato, if I might say, in Gaza, this is the preoccupation of the Gazans. The hydroelectric plant has been shut down, and everybody had talked about this issue. We had electricity for 4 hours only within a 24-hour cycle. The normal circumstances in Gaza are abnormal when it comes to the electricity provision. We used to have 8 hours of outage and 8 hours of electricity alternatively, but during the aggression we had only 4 hours and 20 hours outage, and this is the dismal situation that we are living in Gaza, especially when it comes to electricity. Electricity affects the individuals, and it affects the daily life of the individuals and all the other sectors in Gaza. Indeed, it affects the hospitals and especially the surgeries. And during the outages, we had stopped or delayed a number of listed surgeries. The sanitation also has been affected by the electricity outages, and a number of infrastructure facilities have stopped, especially when it comes to the wells, the health issues and waste management, and the sanitation, and this has affected the population by and large. The communication sector, the infrastructure in Gaza is not up to the standards in comparison to our neighboring countries. Here we're talking about 3G, and the infrastructure is very weak, and we are obliged to move from one place to another if we wanted, for example, to communicate with you. In order to secure a solid communication, we need to prepare for such symposiums. In order for us to communicate with you, we might go, for example, to a certain location that depends on the solar energy and the solar panels in order for the electricity not to be disconnected. So the 3G is very weak in Gaza, and the communication by and large are weak. As far as the figures are concerned, as we talk about the infrastructure harm, there is direct and indirect harm, and the direct one is sometimes tenfold in comparison with the indirect harm. As far as the UNDP is concerned, it had a report and it talked about the 2021 aggression, and the sum amounted to $110 million. But this number is very humble, and I think the real number is tenfold as far as the infrastructure damage is concerned. During the 3 days of the last aggression, the damage amounted to more than $35 million. These are just quick estimations as far as the infrastructure and the other sectors are concerned. Dr. Mazen has talked about the residential units. A number of residential units are still destroyed. They have not been reconstructed. We need $100 million for reconstructing the residential units. As far as the partial damage is concerned, we need 110 million. And as far as the industrial and commerce sectors, we need around $85 million. Despite the fact that the picture is bleak, however, Mahmoud Darwish, the famous Palestinian poet, has always said that Gaza is worthy of life. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Salah.
إن شاء الله يعني نواصل في المناقشة بعد الانتهاء من العروض. هناك الكثير من الأشياء التي نود أن نستفسر عنها منكم بإذن الله.
We'll be asking you a few questions later. Now we'll move to the third intervention for Dr. Yasser Abu Jama, and he's the General Director of Gaza Community Mental Health Program. And the title of his paper is Psychological Effects of Psychological Trauma in the Gaza Strip Wounds That Never Heal. Dr. Yasser is a Palestinian psychiatrist. He obtained an MSc in clinical neuropsychiatry with distinction from Birmingham, and he received the award of Best Alumnus Achievement from the Said Foundation, and he also received the Alumnus of the Year award from the University of Birmingham 2015. And Dr. Yasser is a member of the task force which has developed the National Mental Health Strategy 2015-2019 in Palestine, and with a group of Palestinian mental health professionals, he co-founded the Palestinian Global Mental Health Work Network. He has a large interest in capacity building programs, neuropsychiatry, and advocacy and lobby activities, and he is the Director General of Gaza Community Mental Health Program since 2014, and it is a leading mental health services provider in Palestine, and he recently co-authored few papers that look into integrating public health and human rights approach into mental health in the Gazan context. Dr. Yasser, please, the floor is yours. 15 minutes, please.
بنحب نمسي عليك دكتور غسان.
At the outset, I'd like to say good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, Dr. Ghassan, and I would like to thank the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies for this opportunity. Also, I'd like to thank the panelists, my colleagues. The two gentlemen have talked about a number of issues in Gaza. However, my intervention will be touching upon the community-related issues. Here we're talking about the 30th of August 2022, and a month has elapsed since the GCSE's results, the equivalent of the GCSE's results, the baccalaureate, the high school results, and this is a national celebration in Gaza. We hear fireworks and sometimes gunshots in Gaza. Indeed, it is like a wedding celebration whereby people dance. And here we raise a question, does this occasion worthy of such momentum, or do we think that the Gazan community perhaps need some kind of moments of joy and happiness on the same day when the social media will be full of celebrations and congratulations, and later on the students look for the preferable major at universities, and then the difficult story starts to emerge. Here we talk about differences in the scores of the baccalaureate of the high school period, and the fees. Studying medicine is very expensive in Gaza. Other schools also impose different fees, and in Gaza we cannot say that we have a public university whereby the distinguished students can study free of charge, despite the fact that their right to education is an established right along with the economic and political and civil and other rights. Then the celebrations turn into kind of an atmosphere of sorry, the screen has stopped. Well, now the connection has returned, but there is an interruption in the connection, unfortunately. The gentleman is carrying on. The doctor is saying that yes, so some students do prefer different kind of schools in accordance with the score. The line has disconnected again. Most students think of the benefit of joining universities in the first place because I, as a student, see people around me without jobs, graduates that cannot find a job. So shall I continue and join the university and study for 4 years and then graduate and sit on the couch in the sitting room? So here, a huge question is raised. The 48% of the Palestinian population is below 18 years of age, and these youngsters nowadays are thinking about the feasibility or the benefit of studying in the first place. And in addition to that, I would like to talk about other kind of painful issues, especially when we talk about the population in Gaza, for example, and like Dr. Mazen and Engineer Salah have said, they have talked about the living circumstances in Gaza, and indeed, I called these living circumstances as chronic ones. Here we're talking about chronic problems. We're talking about decades of occupation. We're talking about 15 years of blockade. We're talking about daily problems, daily life problems. We're talking about electricity outages. We're talking about internal political division. We're talking about the fuel crisis, the long-term siege, and so on and so forth. So these kind of dimensions, in addition to the spillover of such dimensions, there is a huge number of refugees in Gaza, 70%, and the level of poverty is soaring, as the gentlemen have said. So This is the reality: chronic long-term occupation, long-term siege, electricity and fuel crisis, internal political division. So what are the implications of these dimensions on the psychology of the layperson? If we ask a psychiatrist, he or she will say, indeed, this will lead to disease, to heart diseases and circulatory system diseases. We talk about encountering a stroke by way of a joke in Gaza. But this is the reality. Indeed, the circulatory system and the heart might be incurring diseases. Hypertension might lead to stroke, but there are also different results that are pertinent to insomnia, obesity, and disorders when it comes to the memory or the focus, and sometimes the lack of hope and indeed being hopeless of changing the circumstances, and perhaps among some children and some youngsters who are 17 and so on and so forth, destitution or depression, because they think that if they join the university, it will take place without any benefit. There's also acute kind of problems that take place from time to time, and as the world is global, interdependent, COVID-19 has struck, and indeed, this has affected us greatly because of the weak infrastructure due to the blockade, and thus the impact of the corona has been lethal. Here we're talking about a double whammy, two kind of blockades: a 15 years Israeli blockade and a COVID-related blockade that affected our communication skills and affected all facets of life. The Gazans resorted to certain methods to overcome the psychiatric related problems, i.e., to be coherent and to depend on the extended family, the nucleus family and the extended family. But still, this has been affected during the COVID-19 crisis. There's also the economic prowess of the Gazans. More than 90% of the Gazans, according to some studies, live on irregular kind of work. As we say, the Gazans have daily work to carry out. If the work stops, then they will sit at home. There's also the other issue that relates to the thirst for a change. Indeed, there was the great march of return crisis. The Israeli occupation has been lethal as well, and they have resorted to disproportionate force. And this had made the Gazans frustrated because the Great March of Return had certain grievances. The Gazans thought in 2018, 2019 that they are appealing to the international community, but unfortunately, the grievances fell on deaf ears. In addition to that, 5 aggressions, and the latest of which took place just weeks ago. 5 very impactful aggressions. And if we ask any psychiatrist about the implications of any aggression, so people talk about the PTSD, people talk about the post-traumatic syndrome, talking about a long-term kind of disorders, anxiety, and in addition to that, disorders that emanate from the loss of hope or the loss of relatives or the loss of beloved ones, the lack of depression and so on and so forth. In conclusion, or in a nutshell, there are a number of issues that lead to hopelessness, the lack of change, depression, because of the accumulative kind of impact of the years of blockade and the 5 wars or the 5 aggressions, and these kind of issues have led to the suffering of the Gazans, and this is a picture that I would like to allude to. When an aggression takes place, this picture summarizes the areas that have been targeted by the Israelis in May 2021. This open prison, these kind of points, these squares reflect the areas that have been targeted by the Israelis, some in green and some in red, as you can see. And as you can notice, most of the neighborhoods have been targeted mostly. So the level of susceptibility to the trauma is very high indeed, and indeed sometimes it is 100%. So no one is safe in Gaza, and this applies to those who work on the front lines, the early responders, the health workers, the lay persons, the ordinary people, because no area in Gaza is safe because we don't have underground shelters, as you know. A few weeks ago, Save the Children scrutinized the situation of the children in Gaza, and I kind of had 2 key findings that I wanted to talk about. They talk about 90% of the children, compared to 60% in 2019, are experiencing higher levels of emotional distress when they are far away from their parents. And here we're talking about 11 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old. And this research took place 10 years following the May aggression of 2021. So for 10 months, children felt less safe when they are away from their parents. And indeed, the percentage is 90%. As far as the emotional stress is concerned, the percentage is 55 to 80%. Caregivers are also experiencing higher levels of emotional distress, with 96% reporting feeling unhappy and constantly anxious. And nearly 2/3, 63% of the caregivers, the parents, feel they are not useful. And 61% report that they cannot overcome the difficulties. Would it be possible to provide to our children a safe life? Actually, this is out of our control. And between one aggression and another, do the Gazans feel happy and safe? No, for 2 reasons: because of the memories of the past and the continuation of the blockade, the continuation of the flights of fighter jets above our heads, the killing of the fishermen, and shooting on the boats and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, from time to time, there is a potential for escalation. That means the Gazans wait another aggression because of certain events that take place in Jerusalem, in Al-Aqsa Mosque, or in the West Bank, or in Gaza, or in any part of Palestine. So anything that takes place in Palestine, the Gazans that would feel that they will be next, they will be targeted, and this leads to the feeling of anxiety, and they think that the future is worse than the past. In November, 6 months after the aggression, we had a study that had a number of people who lost some of their relatives, and amongst those, we found out that 80% of them suffer from depression, 79% of them suffer from anxiety, 75% of them suffer from anger, and 54% of them suffer from somatic related diseases. As far as the children are concerned, 83% suffer from anxiety, 78% from inattention, 74% of depression, and 71% of sleep problems. And these figures are being kind of steady. And because they are steady and they are not decreasing, so this makes us worry indeed. These figures are scary indeed. We're talking about the children who would become leaders. We talked about the first uprising, and we said that those children would lead the society. But then we had the second intifada, then we had a war, then we had the second, the third, and the fourth, and the fifth war. But let's go back to the Save the Children's assessment. And the Save the Children says that if we want to reflect the impact of what takes place in Gaza on the Gazans, first and foremost, we must end the most significant stresses. And what are the stresses in children's lives? They are the blockade, the conflict, violence, and the extreme economic deprivation. So first and foremost, we need to elbow aside the stresses, and we need to finish or find a solution for the Palestinian division itself and arrive at a reconciliation. Also, we need to have action to support the coping potentials and resilience of children and their families. The parents, mothers and fathers must be more resilient and we must support their coping strategies. Lastly, I'd like to say that yesterday, on Monday, the children in Gaza started their new academic years. I think more than 500,000 children, they put on their uniform. Most of these uniforms are new, and they were kind of happy, and they went to their schools, and they kind of revived our hope as parents of a better future. We shall help them, and they shall help us in order for us to dispense with these difficulties that the Palestinian community is facing, and hopefully we will arrive at a state of Palestine that is independent, that is sovereign, that can reclaim the rights of the Palestinians, the human rights, so that they can live with dignity and they can live within the international community that we know. Thank you very much for your listening.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور ياسر. عرض واضح ومؤلم يعني.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yasser. Very painful stuff indeed, and unfortunately doesn't forecast any good news for the future, and we will continue our discussion to see what we can give to this young generations for a better future. We have Ms. Reem Frainah. She is the director of the Aisha Center for the Care of Women and Children in Gaza. Ms. Reem is an activist and a campaigner for women's rights, and she has 27 years of work in defending women's rights and children's rights. She holds an MA degree from Al-Azhar University in Gaza in child psychology. She's taken part in many regional and international conferences, and she has been directing the Aisha Center for years now, which provides safe services for the women and children, and in the fields of protecting women's rights and gender issues. Please, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Ghassan, and thank you for your kind invitation. We also like to thank the Center for Conflict Studies and Humanitarian Work to pay this attention to the dire situation in Gaza and its people. From the title, you can tell that similarly to what my colleagues, Dr. Mazen, Dr. Yasser, and Mr. Salah have said about the general situation, the amount of damage after 5 wars, from a social and political point of view and economic point of view, is easier and more direct to gauge than the psychological impact, although the two kinds of issues cannot be separated. When it comes to the situation of women, I think there are many statistics, many international and regional and local reports with very accessible as open source reports. What I will try to do in my presentation, I will focus on our society or center, Aisha Center, because we have 29 years of work in this regard in the in the psychology of women and gender issues, and it was established in 1993, and in 2010 we became independent than the Ghassan psychological support units, and we started our work in dealing with political violence. And when the Palestinian National Authority came to power, we started dealing with issues pertaining to women subjected to violence in all its forms. And at our center, Aisha Center, we deal professionally and we use new methodologies like the empowerment of the individual, and also deal with providing psychological and social support. We feel in our community in Gaza, this aspect has to be separated from political, economic, and also especially the devastating effect of wars on the lives of women and children, to provide services to women and children, to protect them and to mitigate the damage and the suffering they subjected to. And we employ a policy based on proper professional methodology since 2013, and to develop our own methodologies to deal with the impact of war. Aisha has registered its first engagement to develop methodologies to deal with wars and its devastating impact on the psychology of people, as much as the impact on buildings and infrastructure. And For example, the Hawa Zar program, which focuses on providing help by experts, graduates and non-graduates to use it and to provide support for post-conflict cases, and we contact regional organizations and benefited from their literature. And also we provided guidebooks.
إذا ممكن سامعني؟ أستاذ،
Can you hear me?
ممكن لو ممكن إحنا نركز في الشرح على وضع
Please,
المرأة الفلسطينية.
if you focus on the Palestinian women, yes, I wanted to use statistics from our own clinic because this focuses on the services we've been doing since from 2013, and the clinic has specialists, nurses, and also other social workers, and 25% of our attendees are from children under the age of 18, and we have treatment sessions once a week for 3 months, and we have also other activities like workshops and things. We deal with the problems prevalent amongst women and children as a result of the impact of continuous wars, conflicts, chronic conditions, and disability as a result of war, poverty, etc. 35% of people who approach our support from women and children have symptoms of stress and depression or anxiety, and also suicidal tendencies, which reach 23%. This is a very dangerous trend relating to the current conditions and the repetition of conflict, and between the period between two wars is so short it does not allow the people to recover. 12% actually attempted suicide, and in the last few years this number has almost doubled, and the risk is much higher compared to previous years. And also addiction rates on some medicines. Also now we saw how people started using tranquilizers and other forms of medicines. Also, some women who suffer from psychological conditions are not aware of using some tranquilizers and some other medicines, which really exacerbate the situation. All of this is an attempt by these women to overcome the difficult situation they're in. Our organization has carried out some sort of a survey during the aggression on Gaza in 2022. 118 women 118 people responded, 107 were women, and the average families, 55% of the respondents have no source of income, no constant. They rely on aid and help from relatives. The average income was 600 shekel a month. 60% have one person who suffers from chronic conditions. 14% have people who are injured as a result of the previous wars and conflicts. Also, loss of protection and subjection to violence. 50% had to leave their home, during the war situation. 50% of the respondents suffered from that. This is what we suffer from. People have to leave their homes, and women have to leave their homes and go to host families who, most of them, what 13% went to schools and took refuge in schools, and in the 3 days of the last war, 75% women suffered from either economic or psychological or physical violence and abuse. And also women, caregivers suffer because they lack the ability to provide protection for their families and their children, and their inability to have access to services. Over 35% said they could not have access to any medical help, and 95% managed or suffered from the inability to have access to water or medicine or proper living conditions, and 74% suffered from the inability to have social support and contact with the families. And also, a lot of them suffered because of the fear. I couldn't read all these essential services. And right from day one, it was obvious of this latest aggression, last aggression, there was huge pressures for women and children. 79 said that children within the family suffered threats or violence or abuse, and they needed help because of the problems during the war and the horrible noises they had to endure. And 54% said that one child at least was subjected to some sort of violence or ill treatment. All respondents presented various degrees of symptoms, psychological symptoms. 70% from middle to severe, 25% light symptoms, and 5% suffered from very severe symptoms which required psychological treatment. This paper confirms that we need to apply more pressure on the international community to stop this repeated aggression and wars. It also shows that we do not have the national planning which helps the Palestinian citizen to withstand these pressures, and especially women and children. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, Ms. Reem, and sorry I had to interrupt you. We have a session of about half an hour for questions and answers, and you can use the Q&A feature or use. We have received one question through the chat. The question is one of the attendees who said Mark Schumann. He says, your description of this very difficult situation live in Gaza is mentioned in the American media. What can the leaders of the Gaza Strip can do the ease up the situation? Do they deal with the Israeli government? What are they doing at the international level? Does the government in Gaza take part in negotiations to increase the efforts of reconstruction? Are they able to contact the European Union or Arab governments to mitigate the impact of the siege or minimize the siege or lift the siege? I start with you, Dr. Mazen. I hope that an official person from the government of Gaza will be with us to respond to such questions. I don't know. I don't know if I'm safe enough to answer that. What can the leaders in Gaza say? What I see is what the de facto authority in Gaza is doing very little to deal with issues like unemployment, reconstruction, and poverty. So far as reconstruction is concerned, there were some good efforts. There were good reports mentioned and published, and they managed to get some funding from Malaysia. This may answer the question about their contacts with other governments. They are in touch with the governments that support them and find them a legitimate authority like the Malaysian government. So they receive funding from Malaysia. So far as poverty is concerned, the Palestinian Authority is the one who pays for some financial like funds like salaries or something or other help, although or support to the poor people, although for the last 1.5 years that was not done extensively. Also, they receive funds from Qatar. They distributed, I think, at the rate of $100 per person, although they have some negative behavior, if we can call it that, so far as the business community and the people at large are really very upset by the continued illegal and unjustified fees that the government keeps on imposing. Like the import fee was 20 shekels. I think now it's 50 shekels, and like now since the 1st of August, they are applying taxes to protect the national products. I think it was, for example, poor people have to suffer because, for example, this bottle of water, which used to cost 1 shekel, now is 1.5 or 1.50. So therefore, the businessmen who are engaged importing water, juices, crisps, and chips, etc., are suffering, and they have really tried to sue the government, but I'm not optimistic that they will get any results. It's said that they have a financial crisis and they want to when at times of crisis, governments try to ease up the burden on people In Gaza, the opposite is happening. These are examples. The question asked, is there any contact with the Israeli government? I think there is indirect contact through mediators to help open crossings, especially during the periods of truce and end military aggression. Can they expedite material for reconstruction? I think the problem is not in the material, it's in the financing of it and confiscating people. They try to do that with Egypt. I don't think there's a problem to export them to the Karam of Salem crossing. The problem now is the lack of funding. Do they have contact with other governments? They contact governments which are on good terms with them, like Malaysia and some Arab countries. Are there specific proposals? Normally there are to lift the siege. They tried that many times, and they tried at least called for opening the crossings, easing up the siege. This is the kind of contact. Thank you. Do you want Ms. Reem, Mhandis Salah, or are you all afraid to respond? No, it's not a question of fear, but it's a very complicated question, and the problem is more than just the Palestinian Authority or the de facto authority. There are other complicated issues, and also we are still considered to be under occupation.
So
and
the issue is bigger than the ruling group that
more than
controls
that.
the economy. There is indeed a reality that has been imposed on the ruling institution, regardless of being proponent or opponent to the government. I think the issue is complicated if we want to be fair. However, from the infrastructure perspective, the institutions in Gaza, the ministries, the municipalities, and the other agencies and authorities
بتسهل حضور أي جهة. كثير من سفراء الدول الأوروبية حضروا لغزة. كثير من ممثلين
liaises with the international community. International NGOs have visited Gaza. They are welcomed. The government facilitates the visits of foreign officials and so on and so forth in Ramallah. The same scenario takes place, and as far as the facilitations are concerned, yes, there are facilitations. However, sometimes we might say that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, as they say, because our capacities and capabilities are indeed limited. Dr. Yasser, would you like to add? Yes, in brief, the Palestinian situation by and large, or the choices available to us, citizens and the politicians and the leaders alike, the choices are very humble and simple. So it's like a drowning man clutching to a straw. And this is applied to the Gazan leadership and the West Bank leadership and all the populace. This is first. Second, we as Palestinians have the right to our resources, but unfortunately we don't control them. We might have enough resources to meet our needs. We're not talking about the offshore gas, we're talking about the water, our water that we cannot access. However, this doesn't absolve any officials in the government from shouldering their responsibilities, especially when it comes to the political division. The Palestinians do understand that there is a division. People are saying, we have been suffering and you are still divided. Why don't you reconcile with each other? The national reconciliation is a must, and this is indeed a very pertinent requirement on the part of the Palestinian population. Lastly, the Russian-Ukrainian war has been going on for 6 months, and you can see the discrepancies in addressing the Russian war against Ukraine and our cause, whereby the Palestinians have been suffering from occupation for decades and decades. Dr. Reem? Yes, the de facto authority in Gaza was not successful in putting into place appropriate plans to meet the needs of the Gazans and mitigating their sufferings. Yeah, this is my answer in brief. Thank you. Another brief question from Professor Ulrich. And the question says, what is the
وفي سؤال عن يعني هذا أطرحه أيضا سؤال الأربع متحدثين اللي على استراتيجية التكيف. يعني
what is the role of Al-Quds branch in what goes on? And another question raises the issue of the adaptation strategies. And in Gaza, the resources are limited, and there is a blockade and wars and so on and so forth, and it is difficult to work abroad, and there are restrictions on movement and on travel, and so on and so forth. So what is the adaptation strategy?
البنية التحتية اللي بتأخذ وقت طويل جدا على حسب معلوماتي إنه من حرب 2014 كمان ما زالت هناك يعني دمار لم يتم إعماره.
Especially when the infrastructure is weak. So as the asker said, the Palestinians are steadfast and resilient, and we have a youth kind of bulge, and we have huge numbers of talented graduates and so on and so forth. So how the Palestinian community adapts, Dr. Mazen? Yes, in light with the challenges that you have mentioned, we ought to have adaptation kind of strategies. In order to boost our steadfastness and our resilience, I might be biased and say that the strategy is not enough. And as Sister Reem has said, yes, I say that there is no development vision and there are no sound plans. But if we talk about the micro kind of level and the private sector, we had adaptation strategies that are innovative, and some of them are kind of dangerous, i.e., if a household wants to adapt itself because of the lack of income, here the adaptation comes at the detriment of the food, quality of food, the quantity of food, and retrenchment kind of methods are espoused by the families. The food perhaps is available, however, it is not full of nutrients. We have anemia cases, anemia is spreading, stuntism as well is spreading amongst the children because of the lack of sound nutrients. Since the beginning of the blockade, we were talking about selling, for example, some assets, the like of gold. And as you know, the women in Gaza, they like to buy gold, but when a crisis appears, then they sell them. Perhaps it is to do with selling surplus cars. Perhaps it is to do with falling in debt when it comes to buying goods from the local supermarket, and the debt will be accumulative because the owner of the supermarket, if he sells without taking money in return, he will be indebted on the long run because he wants cash to buy the commodities, and all the families do buy certain goods without paying in return. So there are certain kind of micro adaptive related strategies, but they are detrimental to the society. Businessmen as well adapted themselves with the inflation because they resorted perhaps to decreasing the production capabilities by 30%, by 40%, by 70%, because they couldn't bring the raw materials, or they couldn't pay against the invoices, or because the purchasing power is also weak. Also, there's another dangerous kind of adaptation which relates to the drop in the salary, 20 shekels for 8 hours. This is peanuts. And this applies to doctors as well. The medical students who paid thousands and thousands of dollars to study abroad, they come back here and they receive 1,200 shekel. This is also peanuts. And the pharmacists, they receive 700 to 1,000 shekels. This is also peanuts. So these adaptive kind of micro strategies are to the detriment of the Ghazans, and I wonder how they get married, these graduates, or those who take 1,200 shekels or 700 shekels a month.
عن مستواها في 2007 ما وصلتلوش لحتى الآن، رغم زيادة عدد السكان من 1.5 مليون إلى 2.1 مليون. هذا نوع من التكيف السلبي سواء على صعيد النشاط الاقتصادي، لأن الولايات تتضمن مدخلات ومواد خام وتتضمن سلع غذائية، فهذا الكلام بيؤدي إلى وجود مزيد من المشكلات. كمان في من ضمن التكيفات هو التغيرات في طبيعة المساعدات على مستوى الأونروا أو على مستوى برنامج الغذاء العالمي بيقدم مساعداته للمواطنين، والأونروا بتقدم للاجئين، والسلطة بتدفع للفقراء رغم أنها دفعت مرة واحدة خلال سنة أو 3 شهور أو أكثر حتى. ففي هناك العديد من التغيرات في طبيعة السلع التي قدمت من قبل برنامج الغذاء العالمي والأونروا في سياق التكيف أيضا بما يتلائم مع أولوية المشكلة. وموضوع الأولويات مهم جدا، أن كثرة المشكلات تقتضي أن يكون دائما هناك أولوية يتم البدء بها ثم ننتقل إلى البنود الأخرى. وبالتالي يعني أنا أرى أنه استراتيجية التكيف موجودة وكثيرة. من ضمن استراتيجية التكيف الطلاب الخريجين اللي يتجاوز عدد العاطلين منهم عن العمل 120,000 خريج عاطل عن العمل، أنه ممكن أو مش ممكن، هو فعلا يوافق على العمل ب20 شيكل، وهو فعلا يوافق على العمل مجانا من أجل الحصول على عقدة الخبرة، أنه يعني يعمل له 3 إلى 6 أشهر مجانا متطوعا بالمعنى العام حتى يمكن أن يحصل على هذه الخبرة. والله في بعض الأحيان بيكون التطوع بالواسطة من كثر المتطوعين، وإن المؤسسات لا تجد في نفسها حاجة لمثل هذا التطوع نتيجة محدودية الأنشطة أحيانا. يعني هذه بعض الأمثلة على استراتيجية التكيف إن يعني فهمت هذا القصد.
دكتور، إذا يعني سمحت لي أعقب على هذا، يعني عادة يواجهنا هذا السؤال مع الطلاب دائما القادمون من دول عربية مختلفة عند التعقيب على الحالة الفلسطينية، إنه يتكلم عادة الطالب إنه إحنا بنتكلم عن 2 مليون فلسطيني في قطاع غزة، وإنه كم كبير من المساعدات عبر التاريخ، مش مساعدات قليلة. سواء يمكن معنا مهندس صلاح كمان هو بيعرف أرقام بشكل ممتاز من أرقام مثلا بنك التنمية الإسلامي أو المؤتمرات الدول المانحة اللي بتحصل. وبعد كده 2 مليون فلسطيني مفروض إنه في جالية فلسطينية كبرى سواء في دول الخليج ولا في غرب أوروبا ولا في شمال الولايات، في شمال أمريكا، يعني اللي هو جاليات فلسطينية تستطيع دعم الصمود على الأرض. لماذا لو توقفت المساعدات دائما على غزة ما فيش بديل اقتصادي محلي اللي يخلي الناس يعني ما فيش أفكار خارج الصندوق اللي تخلي إنه الشعب الفلسطيني حتى لو توقفت عليه المساعدات السياسية اللي هي المساعدات المرهونة بسياسات، يعني إنه يكون قادر على الصمود؟ هذا دائما ما يطرح من الطلاب عند هذا السؤال، ومش فقط من الطلاب، حتى في يعني نقاشات السوشيال ميديا عادة ما توجه إلى الفلسطينيين. يعني بعد سنوات طويلة مساعدات كثيرة جدا تنفق على الشعب الفلسطيني، وإحنا بنتكلم عن عدد بسيط من السكان 2 مليون نسمة. لماذا لا يوجد هناك حلول فلسطينية؟
أبدأ ولا في حد؟
هو السؤال اقتصادي يا دكتور، فتفضل حضرتك. يعني
هذه قضية محقة وعادلة، بمعنى أنه يعني المفروض أنه المساعدات تبدأ بتكوين الكيان من أجل يعني المساعدة في التأسيس والانطلاق، ثم يكون هناك منهجية واضحة في الاستغناء التدريجي عن المعونات، أو على الأقل توجيهها للتطوير البنى التحتية. يعني مثلا في بداية السلطة كانت المساعدات الإنمائية تستحوذ على النسبة الأكبر من المساعدات التشغيلية، أي الموجهة للموازنة التشغيلية، وتدريجيا الأمر انعكس تماما. لابد من ملاحظة قضية مهمة. أول شيء أبدأ بالبعد الموضوعي، بعدين البعد الذاتي، وهو أن الاحتلال سبب رئيسي في استنزاف المساعدات. يعني إحنا بنتكلم عن مليارات الدولارات اللي سببها اللي فقدها الاقتصاد الفلسطيني نتيجة إما نتيجة تدمير مباشر بسبب عمليات عسكرية، أو نتيجة جدار الفصل العنصري في الضفة الغربية، والحواجز الثابته والطياره اللي تصل الى 550 حاجز، وعدم القدره على الوصول للموارد خاصه في المنطقه جيم. كل هذه تمثل مصادر للاستنزاف، ناهيك عن الاستنزاف المباشر اللي بيمارسه الاحتلال في التقدير الجزافي بثمن الماء والكهرباء والعلاج الصحي الذي تستورده السلطه الوطنيه الفلسطينيه، اللي بيجي في الموازنه تحت بند صافي الاقراض اللي وصل الى 300 مليون دولار. هل يعقل انه
the debt ceiling? This is unreasonable. Israel cannot put these estimations, and this adds insult to injury.
عدم القدره على الاستغناء عن المساعدات. بالمناسبه احنا الان اجباريا استغنينا عن المساعدات لانه في العام السابق وصلت ل 400 مليون واللي قبله كانت 300.
By the way, the aid was around 400 million last year, and it was more than 1 billion in 2008. So the aid is shrinking, and we have adapted ourselves with the change of the flow of the aid, and this has affected negatively the economic performance and the deficit. The other issue is to do with us, the leaders or the officials should be blamed because of their inability to rationalize the use of the aid and the rationalization of the expenditure. There was an idea in the past. We had 12% of revenues and 3% of expenditure, and this was splendid. However, the strategy was ineffective. The salaries were plummeting, and our integration with the Israeli economy makes our style of living very expensive. We're talking about the poverty line that is high. It is to the tune of 2,700 shekels, $600. If a family in Egypt would earn $600, they will live like monarchs, like kings. But here, the issue is to do with our integration with the economy of Israel. This is affecting the lifestyle of the Gazans that is extremely expensive. Israel as well steals some of our revenues, the revenues that it claims we pay them to the families of the martyrs and the prisoners. Restructuring of the military institutions is very important as well, because as you know, generals with 4 or 5 stars, they do receive salaries more than their American counterparts. Can you imagine? So there is a misuse of the aid indeed locally, and there are the pressures on the part of the occupation. Thank you, Doctor. There is Dr. Samhouri who says he thanks the panelists, and he says the issue of the blockade of Gaza is a political and security issue par excellence. The issues that you are talking about are symptoms of this very issue. We need to look for the root causes, the Palestinian division and the occupation. Otherwise, the prospect of success will be lacking, politically speaking, and security-wise. Dr. Muhammad wonders whether you agree with him. There's also another comment.
أعتقد خرجت. كان هناك السؤال عن فرع جامعة القدس في غزة. يعني
There was a question about the Al-Quds branch in Gaza. I didn't understand the question. If the professor would elaborate his question, will be thankful.
وهي من زمان من دراسات مركز غزة الصحة النفسية من الثمانينات وهي أو التسعينات، وإحنا بنحكي إنه ظروف صعبة جدا، حالات اكتئاب، anxiety.
We'll come back to the psychological problems. You've talked about suicide, segregation of families, depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. Tell us about the impact of that on the social cohesion and the social fabric of our society in Gaza. We always say that we need to
يلجأ إليها الأفراد عندما يتأثرون بالأحداث التي يمرون بها.
look at certain issues that help us to overcome such problems. First and foremost, we must be cleaving to faith. No occupation is perpetual. No occupation can live forever. And but at the end of the day, the occupation will be ending, and we hope it will end soon. The other issue is to do with the social cohesion and talking about the extended families and the support of the extended families.
When it comes to paying respects, condolences for anybody lost in an attack or aggression, you don't see only the members of the extended family. You see almost everybody goes and pays their respects. So therefore, we must not take it for granted that the social fabric will continue in its state of cohesion with the continued aggressions, the economic difficulties, the points of stress, etc. We must try to help people to overcome these social, economic, and psychological stresses and pressures until the occupation is over. This is not difficult. My colleagues who work with us in this program, who are in more direct contact than me with the population, we talk about two main difficulties. First of all, the difficult economic conditions in society. More than 50% are under the poverty line, and they cannot pay for any treatment, so they have to get it free of charge. How can you get rid of depression, if the situation continues and the community goes from one crisis to another, and also the continued aggressions you see a setback for the people who managed to achieve some degree of recovery. We see children who suffered and then they got the treatment, they got a bit better in 2014, 2015, but we see them back in 2021 again. And the economic experts who talk about reconstruction will tell you that we suffer from the continued crises. Some homes which were destroyed in previous aggressions have not been rebuilt. This is the current thing, and we try as much as we possibly can to help them to sustain their social cohesion, but this is not enough because of the prolonged nature of this crisis. We need to see the social conditions and economic conditions improving, and we need to end this discussion and go back to a state of national unity. And we ask, next question goes to Ms. Reem. The children have just come out of another war experience, although it was short this time. Do you think now they're going back to school, the children who probably are going to see some friends lost in crisis conditions? Can you do anything to help them? Immediately after the end of the aggression, there was an initiative by the Social Development Ministry. We organized a summer camp for 1,000 children who were directly impacted by the aggression, whose homes were destroyed partially or totally. And during the summer camp, which lasted for 5 days, and through this activity, we tried to engage the children through fun activities and games, to take them out of the mood they were in. There were 106 injured children. Of course, it was obvious that they were very sad if they're dealing with other children. Adaptation and adapting to this kind of situation, unfortunately, time and time again, we see that women and children are the ones who suffer the most because they are part of a family, and anything that happens, it will impact what happens to the husband or the wife. It will impact the children. So the family, the children start suffering because essential things will be missing. For example, we try that sometimes some men prefer to continue smoking, although cigarettes are very expensive, at the expense of his wife and his children, and depriving them from essential things. And also, some men were pushing their wives to go out and seek employment and working opportunities to help contribute to the income of the family. This has some negative aspects and positive aspects. We try to focus on the positive side to this and try at the same time to help children to deal with the difficult conditions they're going through. And some of the methodologies we use try to integrate the families and engage them and protect them from all forms of violence. Our program is just part of this. There is many other organizations like the UNICEF and Save the Children Fund and others, of course, who play an important and extensive role, and especially now the children are going back to school. It's a very important time for us. Thank you, Mr. Salah. We passed our time. It's gone 5 o'clock. We want to benefit from your experience. There's a question which saying it's not only the siege, there is the mismanagement by humanitarian organizations acting in Gaza so far as their excessive expenses and the lack of expert people who can really gauge which cases need help. Do you agree with that, or do you think this is not right? The Palestinian local organizations are capable enough, and they are one of the reasons why the people are still withstanding. Sometimes when we see some of the complexities, the side effects, we forget the main and essential reasons, the essence, and we must not forget that the essence of the problem lies in the siege, the occupation, and the continued wars. Yes, it's true. Sometimes we see lack of capabilities, expertise, vision, but also we must not forget that the lack of expertise, for example, is due to the lack of opportunity. The Palestinian people are not allowed to leave Gaza to get better training, better experience, or bring in experts. Of course, what is available is at a very limited and restricted degree, nothing more. Also, going back to other question, in managing the funds and the financial aid, I think everybody is responsible because sometimes the aid money is directed to side issues and ignore the important and more essential and main projects like what Dr. Mazen has talked about, and the reason why people are not investing and the risks in the investments, all of this goes back to the main problem, and that is the occupation. This is not just an excuse, but this is really the occupation is the main cause of all our problems. It's the root cause of our major problems. Yes, we keep saying that all the time, but the causes are there and they are clear enough for everyone to see. Sometimes we focus on the side issues and ignore the main issues. I agree with Dr. Muhammad Al-Sunhuri when he said that, or in fact, his summary was very nice of all this situation. Thank you, Dr. Mazen. Yes, go ahead. For what he said, what Dr. Sanuri, he is my professor, and I send my regards to him. And the summary he gave, I said, without a national political framework which is based on national unity, we cannot face all these challenges, and we cannot end the occupation except through this. And therefore, there are strategies which can be proposed partially to deal with partial things, but we agree with His Excellency in what he said. Also, my colleagues and Dr. Yasser specifically reminded me of the social support and the extended family support of each other. But the longer these pressures continue, the means and ways to adapt them weaken. And if 2, 3 years, 4 years, how long can you continue? You can help, but with limited income, with limited salaries. People work for the public sector, for example. Salaries are being cut or stopped or delayed. Even people in the business community, with the continuation and of this situation, their ability is weakened to help others. Another point which was Reem reminded me of when I talked about families. In fact, 90% of family support comes through the role of women. We must not forget that. And the level of women participation after 2010, this indicates that women themselves are trying to play their role and enter the job market. Of course, the level of participation does not necessarily mean that they'll have a job, but at least they're trying seriously. They may have a part-time job or something like that. And this is a form of trying to adapt to the situation. This is what I wanted to say, and thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mazen. I think we passed our time. It's gone 5 o'clock, and I'm told that our speakers have other commitments. So finally, I thank our speakers, Dr. Mazen, Dr. Yasser, Engineer Salah, and Ms. Reem. I thank all our participants, attendees, and our apologies for the questions we did not have time to pose to the panelists. We look forward to more activities in the future to pose your questions, and Dr. Mazen, Dr. Yasser, Ms. Reem, and Mr. Salah, I'm sure they'll make themselves available for us in the future, despite their commitments. I'm speaking on their behalf, but I'm sure that, yes, we will not let you down. Thank you again, all of you. We will, and thank you very much, all of you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ghassan. Thank you all. Thank you very much, all of you.